Dr. Hellion Bracht had reviewed thousands of student applications during his career as administrator of the Galactic Scholarship Academy. He prided himself on maintaining order in an institution where 47 different species learned together on the peaceful world of Tessara Minor. Today, however, his hands trembled as he read the security report for the third time. A human was arriving, with a predator. The landing bay buzzed with nervous energy as staff members positioned themselves behind protective barriers. Security Chief Vandro, whose species had evolved from herd animals, kept his weapon ready despite protocols against displaying arms near students. Everyone knew humans came from a death world. Everyone had heard the stories about their endurance, their pack-hunting tactics, their forward-facing eyes that marked them as hunters. But nobody expected this. The transport shuttle settled onto the landing pad with a hiss of pressure seals. David Warren stepped out carrying a small enclosed travel carrier, his movements casual and relaxed. He looked young for a human, perhaps 20 Earth years, with dark hair and those unsettling eyes that could track movement with predatory precision. He smiled and waved at the assembled welcoming committee. Every single alien took a step backward. The security scanners screamed warnings. Red lights flashed across every screen in the bay. The automated system's voice echoed through the space in 17 different languages. Class 4 Apex Predator detected. Class 4 Apex Predator detected. Initiate containment protocols. Dr. Bracht felt his respiratory system seize. Class 4 meant a creature capable of killing prey much larger than itself. Class 4 meant retractable claws, powerful jaws, hunting instincts refined over millions of years. What had Earth sent them? David seemed confused by the panic. He looked down at the carrier in his hands, then back at the crowd. "Is something wrong?" he asked, his translator rendering the words in perfect galactic standard. "Sir, please set down the containment unit and step away from it," Vandro commanded, his voice tight with fear. "Do not make any sudden movements." The human's face changed, understanding dawning. "Oh, you mean Pickles?" "It's okay, she's completely safe. She's my emotional support animal." "Emotional support?" Dr. Bracht found his voice, though it came out higher than he intended. "Our scanners indicate you are transporting an apex predator. This is an educational institution with hundreds of prey species students." David's expression softened. He knelt slowly, placing the carrier on the ground. "I have all the documentation. Earth requires certain accommodations for students with anxiety disorders. Pickles helps me manage my condition. Without her, I can't function properly in social situations." "What manner of creature is this Pickles?" Vandro demanded, moving closer but keeping his weapon trained on the carrier. "She's a cat, a domestic house cat, about 4 kilograms, orange tabby, 8 years old." David reached for the carrier latch. "Would you like to meet her?" "No." The word erupted from a dozen throats simultaneously, but David had already opened the door. A small orange creature emerged, stretched lazily, and yawned. The assembled aliens gasped in horror as they saw the teeth, sharp, pointed, designed for tearing flesh. The cat's eyes, golden and slit-pupiled, scanned the crowd with what could only be described as casual indifference. Then she sat down and began licking one paw. Dr. Bracht felt dizzy. This tiny creature triggered every instinct his species had developed over millions of years of being hunted. The forward-facing eyes meant it tracked prey through dense cover. The retractable claws currently hidden in those soft-looking paws could slash and grip struggling victims. The flexible spine allowed it to pounce and twist mid-air to catch fleeing targets. And the human kept this killer as a companion? "She's friendly," David said, apparently oblivious to the terror around him. "She mostly sleeps about 16 hours a day. Loves to play with string toys. Gets anxious if I'm gone too long." Pickles chose that moment to notice a small flying insect near the landing pad lights. Her entire body went rigid, muscles coiling. Her pupils dilated. Then she leaped, easily twice her own height, and snatched the insect from the air with one precise paw strike. Someone in the crowd fainted. David scooped up his cat, cradling her like she was something precious rather than dangerous. "Look, I know this is unusual, but I have official documentation from Earth's medical board. I have clearance from the Galactic Council's Disability Accommodation Department. I also have a letter from the Death World Integration Committee stating that Pickles meets all safety requirements for interspecies contact." Dr. Bracht wanted to refuse. He wanted to send this human and his tiny monster back to Earth immediately. But he knew the law. The Galactic Council had passed strict anti-discrimination protocols after the incident with the Solarian students 3 years ago. If Earth said this human required his support animal, and if the proper documentation existed, the Academy could not deny admission without violating 17 different treaties. "I need to see all documentation," Dr. Bracht said finally, "and I need to consult with our legal department." Of course. David shifted Pickles to one arm and pulled out a data pad with his free hand. "I've got everything here. Medical records, behavioral certifications, vaccination records. Pickles has never hurt anyone. Well, except that one mouse in my apartment. But that's literally what cats do." "It kills rodents?" Vandro asked, horrified. "Well, yeah. Cats are obligate carnivores. But she's fed commercial food. She doesn't need to hunt, doesn't need to, but still does." Dr. Brack's head was spinning. David shrugged. "Instinct, I guess. But that was one mouse in 2 years. Honestly, she's too lazy to hunt much. Mostly she just naps in sunbeams." 3 hours later, after extensive consultation with legal experts, medical professionals, and security advisors, Dr. Bracht made his decision. The law was clear. David Warren could attend the academy, but precautions would be necessary. "You may attend," Dr. Bracht announced, feeling like he was making a terrible mistake. "However, your dormitory assignment will be in the remote wing. Signs will be posted warning other students. Your cat must be contained whenever you are in common areas, and any incidents, any at all, will result in immediate expulsion." David's face lit up with genuine joy. "Thank you so much, Dr. Bracht. I promise you won't regret this. Pickles is going to love it here." Dr. Bracht watched the human walk away with his predator, heading toward his assigned quarters. Behind him, maintenance crews were already installing warning signs. Students hurried past the corridor entrance, giving it wide berth. Somewhere in his office, Dr. Bracht had a bottle of Turanian whiskey he had been saving for his retirement. He decided tonight was close enough. As he turned to leave, he caught one last glimpse of the cat through the human's transparent carrier. Pickles looked directly at him with those hunter's eyes, then slowly closed them in what humans called a cat smile. Dr. Bracht shuddered and walked faster. Tillam's ears twitched nervously as she hopped through the academy corridors, her powerful rabbit-like legs carrying her quickly past the warning signs. 3 days had passed since the human arrived with his hunting beast, and campus life had transformed completely. Students whispered in clusters, sharing theories about predator behavior. Some claimed they had heard growling from the remote wing. Others insisted they had seen claw marks on walls. Tillam knew most of it was nonsense, but fear did not care about logic. She clutched her data pad closer to her chest as she entered Professor Quintus's xenobiology lecture hall. The room filled quickly with students seeking safety in numbers. Tillam took her usual seat near the back where she could watch all entrances. Her species had not survived millions of years as prey by sitting with their backs exposed. The room fell silent when David entered. He moved to an empty desk in the front row, completely alone. A clear space of at least 3 meters surrounded him on all sides. On his back he wore a transparent backpack, and inside it, curled in what looked like impossible comfort, was the predator called Pickles. Professor Quintus ruffled his feathers in agitation. The bird-like Avarian paced near his podium, his crest rising and falling with distress. "Mr. Warren, I must insist that you remove the predator from my classroom. This is an environment for learning, not for housing dangerous animals." David remained calm, his voice steady. "With respect, Professor, I have accommodation documentation that allows Pickles to accompany me to all classes. Separating us causes severe anxiety that prevents me from learning effectively." "This is unacceptable," Quintus declared. "How can students focus on biology when a biological weapon sits among them?" Other students nodded agreement. Tillam felt guilty for her relief that someone was finally confronting this situation. David pulled out his data pad. "I understand your concern. However, my condition is recognized by the Galactic Council's medical board. Dr. Bracht approved my attendance with Pickles present. If you'd like, I can provide all documentation again." Professor Quintus looked ready to argue further, but he knew the law as well as anyone. Finally, he sagged in defeat. "Very well. But the creature must remain in a secure carrier during class. No exceptions." David nodded and carefully transferred Pickles into a transparent carrier that he placed on his desk. The cat stretched, circled once, then settled down to sleep. Within seconds, soft purring sounds emanated from the carrier. "Is it growling?" Someone whispered loudly. "I think it's preparing to attack," another voice answered. David turned in his seat. "She's purring. It means she's content and relaxed." This information did not seem to comfort anyone. Professor Quintus began his lecture on predator-prey relationships in ecosystems, apparently determined to ignore the irony. Tillam tried to focus on her notes, but her eyes kept drifting to the transparent carrier. The predator's breathing was slow and even. It genuinely appeared to be sleeping. How could something so dangerous look so peaceful? Halfway through the lecture, Professor Quintus used a laser pointer to highlight information on his projection screen. The small red dot danced across the wall as he emphasized different points. Inside the carrier, Pickles' eyes snapped open. Tillam watched in horror as the cat's entire demeanor changed. Those golden eyes locked onto the red dot with frightening intensity. The cat's body lowered into a crouch, muscles tensing. Her hindquarters began to wiggle slightly, like she was preparing to launch an attack. "Professor?" Tillam heard herself say, her voice barely above a whisper. "The predator is hunting." The room erupted into chaos. Students scrambled away from David's desk. Professor Quintus dropped his pointer. Whisper. A delicate moth-like Luminian student collapsed in a dead faint, her wings folding around her body in an instinctive protective display. "Stop. Everyone calm down." David stood, raising his hands. "She's not hunting. She's playing." "Cats chase laser dots for fun." "Fun?" Professor Quintus looked horrified. "Your species considers hunting practice to be entertainment?" David opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I guess when you put it like that, it does sound bad. But Pickles knows the difference between a toy and prey. She's not actually trying to kill anything." "It looks identical to attack preparation," a student called out. "Because play hunting uses the same instincts as real hunting," David admitted. "But it's just play." I promise, several students had already left the classroom. Whisper was being attended to by friends who fanned her wings with data pads. Professor Quintus looked like he deeply regretted not calling in sick today. Into this chaos walked Garrett, a slug-like molluscar who moved on a trail of slime that his body secreted. He had been absent for the first part of class, arriving late with what appeared to be recording equipment. "Fascinating," Garrett said, his voice bubbling with genuine interest. He approached David's desk directly, showing no fear whatsoever. "I observed the entire behavioral sequence. The pupil dilation, the muscle coordination, the focus intensity. Mr. Warren, would you be willing to answer some questions about predator psychology?" Tillam stared in disbelief. Garrett was getting closer to the predator, not farther away. David looked relieved to see someone who was not terrified. "Of course. I'd be happy to explain anything about cat behavior." "Excellent." Garrett pulled out his data pad. "First question. How does your species manage psychological coexistence with creatures that possess such obvious hunting capabilities?" "We raised them since they were kittens," David explained. "Cats were domesticated about 10,000 years ago on Earth. They chose to live with humans because we had food and shelter. We kept them because they controlled pest populations. Eventually, it became a mutual relationship based on companionship." "You domesticated a predator." Professor Quintus seemed unable to comprehend this. "Voluntarily? Humans domesticated lots of predators," David said. "Dogs, cats, ferrets, even some birds of prey. We found it more useful to work with them than fear them." Garrett's entire body quivered with excitement. "This is revolutionary. Most species flee from predators or fight them. Humans created partnerships. The psychological implications are enormous." Class ended early, with most students eager to escape. But Garrett remained, asking question after question about human-animal relationships. Tillam found herself lingering near the door, listening despite her fear. "Would you like to study together sometime?" Garrett asked David. "I'm writing my thesis on interspecies psychological dynamics. Your perspective would be invaluable." David smiled, looking genuinely happy. "I'd like that a lot." As they left together, Tillam heard Garrett's doormates warning him about the danger of befriending humans. Garrett dismissed their concerns with a wave of his eye stalks. That night, Tillam lay in her burrow-style sleeping pod, thinking about what she had witnessed. The predator had looked focused, yes, but not malicious. The human had seemed patient and kind, not aggressive. And Garrett, who was considered one of the smartest students in their year, saw opportunity where others saw only Dangerous, and maybe fear was not the same as wisdom. She was still pondering this when the emergency alarms began to wail. The automated announcement echoed through every dormitory. Security alert, predator loose on campus. All students remain in your rooms. Security teams are responding. Repeat, predator loose on campus. Tillum pulled her blankets tighter around herself and tried to ignore the sound of her own racing heartbeat. Somewhere out there in the darkness of the academy corridors, a hunter was prowling free, and nobody knew what it would do next. Security Chief Vandro had coordinated evacuations during meteor strikes, contained chemical spills, and once talked down a student experiencing a psychotic break. Nothing in his 20 years of service had prepared him for hunting a predator through an educational facility designed by species who had never needed to worry about such things. His tactical team moved through the corridors in tight formation, sensors sweeping for heat signatures. Behind him, Dr. Bracht monitored 6 different screens showing camera feeds from across campus. Somewhere in this maze of classrooms and laboratories, a 4-kilogram apex predator was on the loose. How did it escape? Vandro demanded for the 4th time. The human claims he doesn't know. Dr. Bracht replied, his voice tight. He insists he secured the cat's enclosure before sleeping. He woke to find the carrier open and the predator gone. Predators are intelligent, Vandro muttered. They adapt. They learn. On another screen, they watched David running through corridors calling for Pickles, his voice desperate and worried. The human looked more scared than anyone, which somehow made the situation worse. If even the predator's handler feared for its absence, what did that say about the danger? What none of them knew was that Pickles had indeed learned. She had watched David work the carrier latch dozens of times during their travels. Cats were excellent observers, and she had evolved from creatures that needed to be clever to survive. The latch was simple. She had figured it out 2 days ago, but had not bothered leaving until something interesting caught her attention. Tonight, that something was squeaking. Pickles moved through the ventilation system with the grace of a creature designed for silent movement. Her padded paws made no sound against the metal ducts. Her whiskers detected air currents that told her about spaces ahead. And her ears, mobile and sensitive, tracked the source of those interesting squeaking sounds. The kitchen storage area was having a very bad night. Dozens of scrit, small rodent-like creatures that had infested the academy for weeks were enjoying their usual feast of stolen supplies. They were native to Tessera Minor but had become pests that even professional exterminators struggled to control. They were fast, clever, and bred quickly. They had never encountered a cat before. Pickles observed from her ventilation perch for several seconds, her predator brain calculating distances and escape routes. Then she dropped into the storage area and did what millions of years of evolution had designed her to do. She hunted. David heard kitchen sounds as he ran past, crashes, squeaks, and strange thumping noises. His heart sank. He burst through the door expecting disaster, and instead found something completely different. Pickles sat in the center of the floor, looking exceptionally pleased with herself. Around her, arranged in what almost looked like a deliberate pattern, were at least 30 deceased scrit. The cat was purring so loudly that David could hear it from across the room. "Oh no," David whispered. Then he noticed that Pickles was not injured. The food stores were actually more organized than before, and the scrit population had just suffered a significant setback. Garrett arrived moments later, having followed David despite warnings to stay in his room. "Oh my," the molluscar said, his eye stalks extending to take in the scene. "This is remarkable. This is terrible," David corrected, gently picking up his cat. "She killed dozens of them." "She killed dozens of pests," Garrett pointed out. "David, do you not understand? The scrit have been plaguing the academy for 2 months. They contaminate food supplies, damage equipment, and spread disease. The kitchen staff files complaints weekly. Exterminators have tried poison, traps, and sonic deterrents. Nothing worked." David looked at the scene again with new understanding. She was hunting pests? Apparently very successfully. The kitchen doors burst open and Chef Barris rushed in, his crab-like legs carrying his massive body with surprising speed. He worked the overnight shift and had been alerted to the disturbance. He stopped at the site before him, his eye stalks swiveling to take in every detail. "Is that the human's predator?" he asked slowly. "Yes," David said, waiting for the explosion of anger. Instead, Chef Barris began to laugh. The sound was bubbling and strange, his species' expression of joy. "This is wonderful. Do you know how much food we lose to those vile skrit? Do you know how many health inspections we have failed because of their contamination?" "I'm sorry she made such a mess," David began. "Mess? This is beautiful." Chef Barris moved closer, examining the deceased skrit. "Look at the efficiency. Clean kills, no damage to supplies, no toxic chemicals needed." "Mr. Warren, what does your predator eat?" David blinked at the unexpected question. Cat food mostly. Sometimes treats. She needs a specific diet. We have food waste daily. Meat scraps, fish parts, things we cannot serve but are still good quality. What if we made an arrangement?" Chef Barris looked at Pickles with something approaching admiration. "Your predator handles our pest problem. We ensure she is well fed. Everyone benefits." Before David could respond, Dr. Bracht arrived with a security team. The administrator took in the scene with wide eyes. His first instinct was clearly to be angry, but then he noticed Chef Barris's expression. "Chef, are you smiling?" "Dr. Bracht, I have been requesting additional funding for pest control for 3 months. You told me the budget was too tight. This human's predator has solved our problem in 1 night, free of charge." Chef Barris gestured at the skrit. "I formally request permission for the predator to access kitchen storage areas on a regular schedule." Vandro looked ready to object, but Dr. Bracht held up a hand. The administrator moved through the storage area, examining the evidence. The skrit had been a genuine problem. The previous extermination attempts had cost thousands of credits and accomplished nothing. And now, thanks to one escaped cat, the infestation had been dealt a serious blow. "The biology building reported skrit problems last week," Dr. Bracht said slowly. "So did the engineering department. And student housing. Pickles could help with those too," David offered hesitantly. "If you wanted. Cats are natural pest control. It's one reason humans started keeping them thousands of years ago." Dr. Bracht felt a headache building behind his eyes. Every instinct told him this was a terrible idea. Allowing a predator to roam freely through campus? Madness. But he was also a practical administrator who had to answer to budget committees and health inspectors. "Controlled trial," he announced finally. 2 weeks. The predator may access designated areas while supervised by Mr. Warren. She wears a tracking collar at all times. First sign of aggression toward any student, the arrangement ends immediately. David nodded eagerly. "She won't hurt anyone. I promise." "You cannot promise that," Vandro interjected. "She is a predator." "She is a well-fed, domesticated cat," David corrected gently. "There's a difference. Pickles doesn't hunt because she's hungry or aggressive. She hunts because it's instinct, like how some species collect shiny objects or build nests even when they don't need to. But she only targets actual prey animals, not students." "The skrit are rodents," Garrett added. "To the cat's instincts, they are natural prey. But students are far too large and wrong-shaped to trigger hunting behavior. Predators are selective. They target appropriate prey." Dr. Bracht wanted to argue further, but he was tired. The kitchen was significantly cleaner than before, and Chef Barris was already making plans for food arrangements. Sometimes, as an administrator, you had to accept when you had been outmaneuvered. 2 weeks, he repeated firmly. "Not 1 day longer unless results are acceptable." That night, in a hastily called faculty meeting, the proposal was presented. The vote was split almost exactly down the middle. Those who feared predators versus those who dealt with infestations daily. Dr. Bracht, as the administrator, had the deciding vote. He thought about budget reports, health violations, failed extermination attempts, and the very real possibility that he was about to make a historic mistake. Then he thought about 30 deceased skrit and 0 student injuries. "Approved," he said. On a trial basis. The meeting erupted in arguments, but the decision was made. David returned to his quarters with Pickles, who seemed completely unaware of the controversy she had caused. She curled up in her favorite sleeping spot and began washing her face with one paw. David sat on his bed, processing everything that had happened. Somehow, his anxious support cat had become the Academy's unofficial pest control specialist. He was not sure whether to laugh or worry about what would happen next. Petal was tending her meditation garden when she first heard about the official decision. The flower-like Florian had chosen a quiet spot on campus specifically to avoid drama, yet drama seemed determined to find her. Students hurried past her garden plot, arguing loudly about predators and prey, safety and prejudice. She sighed, her petals drooping slightly. The human and his cat had become the only topic anyone discussed anymore. Campus was divided into two camps: those who saw Pickles as a dangerous threat and those who appreciated the sudden absence of Scrit in their dormitories. Petal tried to avoid taking sides, but her scientific curiosity kept pulling her attention toward the controversy. 3 days into the approved trial period, David gave a presentation in Professor Hemlock's comparative cultures class. Petal attended because it was required, not because she wanted to witness more conflict, but what she saw surprised her. David stood at the front of the classroom with Pickles in her carrier beside him. Instead of looking defensive or angry, he seemed calm and prepared. He activated the projection screen and began his lecture. "I want to talk about domestication," he said, "not just of cats but the entire concept. Because I think there's been a misunderstanding about what it means that humans live with predators." He showed images from Earth: cats sleeping beside human infants, dogs protecting families, even large predators like horses working alongside humans. The classroom watched in stunned silence. 10,000 years ago, wildcats lived near human settlements because we attracted rodents. They hunted the rodents, we appreciated fewer pests, and gradually we learned to coexist. Then something interesting happened. The cats that were less aggressive, more curious, and more comfortable around humans had better access to food. They survived better and had more offspring. Petal leaned forward despite herself. This was actual science, not emotional arguments. Over generations, cats changed, David continued. Not because we forced them, but because the cats that could live peacefully with humans thrived. We selected for companionship traits without even realizing it, and the cats that stayed fully wild remained wild. Both versions still exist on Earth. A student raised their hand nervously. "But you still live with creatures that could harm you. Why take that risk?" David smiled gently. "Every relationship involves trust. My roommate could harm me too. They know where I sleep, they could poison my food, they could steal my things. But I trust them not to. Trust isn't about power or capability. It's about relationship and choice." He showed more images. Cats grooming each other. Cats bringing toys to humans. Cats purring while being petted. Pickles could scratch me right now if she wanted to. She has claws. She has teeth. But she chooses not to because we have a relationship built on trust and mutual benefit. I feed her, play with her, and give her affection. She provides companionship and emotional support. "What if she stops choosing not to harm?" another student asked. "Then I deal with it," David said honestly, "just like you would deal with any relationship that becomes harmful." But in 30,000 years of living with cats, humans have learned that well-treated, well-fed cats almost never attack their companions. Violence comes from fear, pain, or desperation, not from satisfied, comfortable animals. Petal found herself thinking about her own species' relationships. Florians lived symbiotically with certain insect pollinators. They trusted tiny creatures to perform essential functions. Was that so different from what David described? After class, she approached him hesitantly. "Your presentation was interesting. I study botanical relationships on my homeworld. We have partnerships with insects that some species might consider dangerous. They have stingers, venom, mandibles. But we trust them because we understand the relationship." David's face brightened. "Exactly. It's the same principle. Different species can work together if there's mutual benefit and understanding. Would you—" Petal paused, surprised by her own boldness. "Would you like to see my garden? I think you might appreciate the ecological relationships." They spent the afternoon in Petal's meditation space, while she explained how her garden replicated the complex, symbiotic relationships of her homeworld. David listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions. Pickles, released from her carrier in the enclosed space, immediately found a sunny spot and fell asleep. "See?" David pointed at his cat. "This is actually what she does most of the time. Sleep in warm places." Petal studied the predator carefully. Without the context of fear, Pickles looked almost comical. A small, furry creature sprawled in completely undignified comfort. Her belly was exposed, her legs stretched out, her mouth hanging slightly open. "She does not look dangerous right now," Petal admitted. "That's because she's not. She's a sleepy, comfortable, middle-aged cat. The dangerous part only activates when she sees appropriate prey." David sat beside his cat, gently stroking her fur. "Predators aren't evil. They're just animals doing what evolution designed them to do." Over the following weeks, more students began cautiously approaching David. Most still kept their distance. But a small group of the scientifically curious started regular meetings to discuss interspecies relationships and predator psychology. Garrett led these sessions with enthusiasm, treating the entire situation as a research opportunity. Tillam attended one meeting despite her lingering fear. She sat in the back ready to flee at any moment, but she made herself stay. David noticed but did not pressure her to move closer or interact with Pickles. He simply continued his explanations, answering questions with patience. "Why does she do that?" someone asked as Pickles began kneading a blanket with her paws, claws extending and retracting rhythmically. "It's a comfort behavior from when they were kittens," David explained. "Baby cats need their mothers while nursing. Adult cats do it when they feel safe and content. So the predator displays vulnerability?" The question came from a student who studied behavioral psychology. "All creatures show vulnerability with those they trust," David said. "That's what trust means." Tillam thought about this long after the meeting ended. She had spent her life believing predators were always dangerous, always hunting, always threatening. But David's cat spent most of her time sleeping, playing, or seeking affection. The hunting behavior happened only in specific contexts with specific triggers. Maybe predators were more complicated than she had believed. The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a particularly stressful week. Tillam was studying late in the library when a panic attack struck, something that happened occasionally since childhood. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, her vision tunneled, and fear overwhelmed her rational thoughts. She did not notice David entering the library, returning books before closing time. But he noticed her. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, keeping his distance. Tillam could not speak, could only shake her head as tears streamed down her face. "Panic attack?" David guessed. When she nodded, he said, "I get those too. That's why I have Pickles. Can I help?" He talked her through breathing exercises, his voice calm and steady. He did not touch her or crowd her space. He just stayed nearby, a steady presence until the panic subsided. When her breathing normalized, he offered water from his bottle. "Thank you," Tillam whispered. "I understand what it's like," David said. "Fear that doesn't make logical sense but feels completely real anyway." Tillam looked at him with new understanding. This human who lived with a predator, who everyone assumed was brave and fearless, also struggled with anxiety. He also knew terror that came from within rather than from external threats. "Could I?" she started, then stopped, surprised by her own question. "Could I meet Pickles properly?" "Not in class. Somewhere quiet," David smiled. "I'd like that." 2 days later, in the campus counseling center with Dr. Bracht observing, Tillam met Pickles in a controlled environment. David coached her through the introduction carefully. "Let Pickles approach first. No sudden movements. Speak softly. Respect boundaries." Pickles, demonstrating the contrary nature of cats everywhere, completely ignored Tillam. The cat was far more interested in investigating the room's corners, sniffing the furniture, and eventually finding a cushion to sleep on. Tillam watched this fearsome predator sniff a chair leg with intense focus, then sneeze and walk away. The absurdity of her own fear suddenly struck her. She started laughing, nervous, shaky laughter that turned genuine. Here she was, terrified of a creature that was currently trying to fit its entire body into a box 2 sizes too small. "She's ridiculous," Tillam said, wonder in her voice. "She really is." David agreed fondly. When Tillam finally worked up the courage to touch Pickles, one gentle touch on the cat's back, and the cat responded by purring loudly and leaning into the contact. Something shifted in Tillam's understanding. This was not a monster. This was just an animal, living its life, doing what felt natural to it. The news of Tillam's successful interaction spread quickly. If someone from a prey species could overcome their fear, maybe others could too. The waiting list for supervised introductions with Pickles grew longer. But not everyone was pleased with these developments. A student named Oris, whose species had evolved from grazing herd animals, watched the growing acceptance with increasing anger. He began collecting signatures on a petition, organizing protests, and arguing loudly that predators on campus violated students' right to feel safe. His petition gained surprising support, not a majority, but a significant minority of students who felt their concerns were being dismissed. They argued that accommodation for one student should not come at the cost of many students' psychological well-being. The situation came to a head when formal charges were filed demanding a hearing to determine David and Pickles' future at the academy. David received the notice in his mailbox one morning. He read it 3 times, his hands trembling, then sat down heavily with Pickles in his lap. "They want us gone," he whispered to his cat. Pickles, as usual, had no opinion on academic politics. She simply purred and butted her head against David's hand, asking for ear scratches. David provided them automatically while staring at the hearing notice. Everything he had worked for, his education, his friendships, his chance to bridge the gap between species, now depended on a formal hearing in front of judges who might decide that fear was more important than understanding. He had 1 week to prepare his defense. The hearing chamber had been designed for academic disputes about grades or research ethics violations. Nobody had anticipated needing it for a trial about whether a predator could remain on campus. 5 judges sat at an elevated panel, representatives from different species chosen for their supposed impartiality. Below them, David sat alone at a small table with Garrett beside him for moral support. Across the aisle, Oris sat with his team of supporters. The gallery was packed beyond capacity. Students lined the walls when seats ran out. Faculty members stood in doorways. Even the academy's maintenance staff had found reasons to be nearby. Judge Sanctus, the eldest Avarian on the panel, called the proceedings to order. His feathers were completely gray with age, and his eyes held the sharp awareness of someone who had witnessed many debates. This hearing will determine whether student David Warren may continue his studies while accompanied by his declared support animal. We will hear arguments from both sides before deliberating. Oris stood first, his tall frame imposing. His species had evolved running from predators, and that evolutionary memory colored every word he spoke. Distinguished judges, I speak for students who cannot sleep because they hear predator sounds in the night. I represent those who take longer routes to class to avoid certain corridors. I advocate for beings whose ancestors were hunted, killed, and consumed by creatures exactly like the one being housed on this campus. His voice carried genuine emotion. We are told to overcome our fears, to adapt, to accept. But why should we? We came to this academy for education, not to relive our species' worst nightmares. He presented statistics about anxiety reports since David's arrival. Complaints about sleep disturbances had increased 40%. Several students had requested transfers to other institutions. 3 had already withdrawn entirely. One student's comfort should not come at the expense of dozens of students' safety, psychological or otherwise. Oris concluded, we request that David Warren be given the choice. Continue his education without the predator, or leave the academy. The gallery murmured. Several students nodded agreement. David felt his chest tighten with anxiety. Judge Sanctus turned to David. You may present your defense. David stood, his prepared notes trembling in his hands. Distinguished judges, I suffer from severe anxiety disorder. Without Pickles, I cannot function in social situations. I experience panic attacks, disassociation, and debilitating fear. The Galactic Council recognizes support animals as legitimate medical accommodations for disabilities. Removing Pickles would effectively deny me access to education, based on a condition I cannot control. He pulled up documentation on the projection screen, medical records, psychological evaluations, treatment histories. I have tried medication. I have tried therapy. The only thing that consistently helps is my cat. Asking me to leave her behind is like asking a student who uses mobility aids to leave them at home. Garrett stood, adding his perspective. I have studied Mr. Warren's case extensively. The psychological bond between humans and their companion animals is profound. Separation causes measurable stress responses. This is not preference, it is medical necessity. David then presented the Academy's own data. Since Pickles began pest control duties, scrit infestations had dropped 87%. Food waste from contamination had decreased. Health inspection scores had improved. 3 different departments had requested regular access to Pickles' pest control services. Pickles has never harmed a single student, David emphasized. She has never displayed aggression toward anyone. She responds only to actual pests, creatures that damage property and spread disease. The fear students feel is valid from an evolutionary perspective, but it is not based on Pickles' actual behavior. He showed testimonials. Tillam spoke about overcoming her fear. Petal discussed ecological partnerships. Chef Barris praised the improved kitchen conditions. Even some of Professor Quentis's research had been influenced by observations of human-animal bonding. "I understand that fear," David said, his voice breaking slightly. "I live with fear every day. That is why I have Pickles. She helps me function despite my terror. I am asking for the same understanding I try to show others that fear can be acknowledged while we still choose coexistence." The judges began deliberating when the fire alarm shattered the tension. Panic erupted immediately. Smoke began filtering into the hearing chamber from somewhere deeper in the building. The orderly proceeding dissolved into chaos as hundreds of students tried to evacuate simultaneously. Emergency lights flashed. Automated voices gave directions in multiple languages. David grabbed Pickles's carrier and joined the evacuation, but the corridors were thick with smoke and confusion. Species with different sensory capabilities struggled to navigate together. Someone screamed that fire was spreading from the chemistry wing. Another voice yelled about a blocked exit. In the chaos, David heard a different sound, a weak, frightened call for help. He recognized the voice. Whisper, the Luminian who had fainted during his first class. He pushed against the crowd following the sound. He found her beneath a collapsed ceiling panel, her delicate wings pinned. Smoke was affecting her respiratory system badly. Her species was particularly vulnerable to contaminated air. She had perhaps minutes before losing consciousness completely. David pulled out Pickles's carrier and opened it. "Find the exit," he told his cat urgently. "Find clean air." Pickles understood tone if not words. She sniffed the air, ears swiveling, processing information beyond human perception. Then she moved with purpose, leading David through the smoke-filled maze. Her superior senses detected air currents and temperature differences that revealed which paths were clear and which led toward fire. David followed, carrying Whisper's light body, trusting his cat completely. They emerged into clean air minutes later. Medical teams rushed forward to treat Whisper. Emergency responders praised David's quick thinking. Someone mentioned that other students were still missing, trapped in sections that the smoke had cut off from main exits. David sent Pickles back 3 more times. Each time, the cat navigated through conditions that would have confused or overwhelmed humans. Her predator senses turned toward saving lives rather than hunting prey. She led rescue teams to students who had become disoriented. She alerted responders to a fire spreading toward the library before anyone else detected it. By the time the fire was fully contained, a chemical accident in a laboratory, not an attack, Pickles had assisted in rescuing 7 students. The hearing reconvened the next day with a very different atmosphere. Whisper's parents attended, having arrived during the night. They asked to speak. "Our daughter is alive because of the human and his predator," Whisper's mother said, her wings displaying colors of gratitude. "We were told the cat was dangerous. Instead, she ran into smoke and fire to help find our child. Actions matter more than species." Judge Sanctus studied David for a long moment. "Mr. Warren, you could have simply evacuated. Why did you risk your life and your cat's life for other students?" David seemed confused by the question. "Because they needed help. That is what you do when people need help. Even for students who wanted you removed from the academy. Especially then," David said quietly. "Fear comes from not understanding. I can't force understanding, but I can show through actions that the fear is misplaced." The judges deliberated for only 30 minutes. When they returned, Judge Sanctus delivered the verdict. "This panel finds that David Warren poses no threat to campus safety. Furthermore, his companion animal has demonstrated value beyond pest control. She possesses sensory capabilities that proved life-saving in emergency conditions. Mr. Warren may remain at the academy with his support animal." The gallery erupted, some in celebration, some in protest. But the judge was not finished. "However, we recognize that fear is not easily overcome. We order the following. David Warren will continue his educational program about human-animal relationships. Safe spaces will be designated for students who prefer to avoid predator contact. Pickles will wear a tracking device at all times so her location is always known. And this academy will develop protocols for other students who may arrive with support animals in the future." He looked at both David and Oris. Fear and accommodation must coexist. This is not about one side winning. This is about learning to share space despite differences. Later, As David walked across campus with Pickles, students reacted in mixed ways. Some smiled and waved. Others still gave him wide space. Oris passed by without speaking, his expression unreadable. But Whisper approached, her wings still bandaged but her flight restored. "Thank you," she said simply, "for not giving up on us even when we feared you." David smiled. "Fear is natural. Overcoming it is brave. You all have been far braver than you realize." That night in his dormitory room, David sat with Pickles curled in his lap. He had won the right to stay, but he knew the real work was just beginning. Changing minds took time. Building trust required patience. Pickles purred, completely unconcerned with philosophy or politics. She had done her job. She had protected her human's pack. Now she wanted dinner and a nap. David laughed and scratched behind her ears. "You know, for a terrifying predator, you are really demanding about your meal schedule." Pickles meowed agreement and head-butted his hand, demanding more attention. Some things, David reflected, transcended species. Spring arrived on Tessara Minor, with the gradual warming that the planet's careful climate systems allowed. 3 months had passed since the hearing, and the Academy had transformed in subtle but meaningful ways. David no longer ate lunch alone. His interspecies relations seminar had grown from 8 students to 43, requiring a larger classroom. And Pickles had somehow become the unofficial mascot of the biology department. Professor Quentis would never admit it publicly, but he had started incorporating observations of cat behavior into his lectures. Students learned more about predator psychology from watching one relaxed house cat than from any textbook. Garrett had submitted his thesis on human-animal bonding to 3 prestigious journals. All 3 requested publication. He was already planning his next research project about interspecies cooperation across evolutionary boundaries. Petal had introduced David to the Florian concept of symbiotic partnerships, drawing parallels between his relationship with Pickles and her species' relationship with pollinator insects. They spent afternoons in her garden discussing how different species could support each other, when both benefited from the arrangement. Even Tillum had changed. She still preferred to keep distance from Pickles most of the time, but she no longer felt terror at the sight of the cat. She had learned that fear could be acknowledged and managed rather than eliminated completely. Some days she even volunteered to help David with his educational presentations, speaking about her journey from panic to cautious acceptance. Not everyone had changed their minds. Oris and his supporters maintained their position that predators should not be allowed on campus. But they had shifted from demanding removal to advocating for better accommodation systems. It was not friendship, but it was coexistence. Then the Galactic Council observers arrived. David first learned about it from Dr. Bracht, who summoned him to the administration office on a quiet afternoon. The administrator looked tired but not angry, which David had learned was usually a good sign. "The Galactic Council is reviewing Earth's application for full membership," Dr. Bracht explained. "They are sending observers to various human integration sites to assess how your species functions in mixed species environments. This academy is one of their evaluation points." David felt his anxiety spike. "So they're coming to judge whether humans are acceptable?" "In a manner of speaking, yes." Dr. Bracht leaned back in his chair. "Your presence here has been controversial but ultimately successful. The council wants to understand how that happened. They want to meet you and Pickles." The observers arrived 2 weeks later, a delegation of 5 species representing different evolutionary backgrounds. Their leader was an elderly Avarian named Sanctus, the same judge who had presided over David's hearing. Seeing him again made David nervous until he noticed the slight nod of recognition Sanctus offered. The observers attended classes, interviewed students and faculty, and reviewed incident reports. They examined the pest control data, the emergency response records, and the psychological evaluation studies that Garrett had conducted. They watched Pickles sleep through an entire afternoon, occasionally waking to groom herself before returning to sleep. Finally, they requested a formal assembly where David would present to them directly. The auditorium was packed with students from all years and departments. Faculty lined the sides. Even kitchen staff and maintenance workers attended. David stood on the stage with Pickles' carrier beside him, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes. Sanctus began with a question. "Mr. Warren, Humans are classified as a predator species from a death world. Your history includes significant violence, wars, conquests, extinction events. Why should the Galactic Council trust humanity with membership? David took a deep breath. He had prepared for this question, but the answer still felt inadequate. Because our history also includes change. Yes, we were violent. Many species were violent in their early development. We fought wars, but we also built peace. We caused extinctions, but we also created conservation efforts. We made terrible mistakes, but we learned from them. He gestured to Pickles. This cat's ancestors were apex predators that hunted birds, small mammals, and reptiles. They were perfectly designed killers. But humans didn't exterminate them or fear them. We learned to live alongside them. Eventually, we made companions of them. That's the core of human nature. We adapt, we cooperate, and we choose coexistence even when conflict would be easier. Sanctus tilted his head, a gesture of consideration in his species. But predators are dangerous by nature. Predator doesn't mean evil, David replied, echoing words he had said many times before. It just means a specific survival strategy that evolution developed. Prey species evolved speed, camouflage, group defense. Predator species evolved hunting skills. Both are just adaptations. What matters is what we choose to do with our capabilities. He activated the presentation screen, showing images from Earth's history, humans and wolves working together thousands of years ago, cats protecting grain stores from rodents, horses carrying humans across continents, falcons hunting alongside humans, dogs guiding blind people, therapy animals visiting hospitals. We didn't overcome our predator nature, David explained. We redirected it. Humans have strong protective instincts. That's predator pack behavior. But we protect not just our own species. We protect animals, environments, even ideas. We bond with other species and defend them fiercely. That's what predators can become when they choose cooperation over conquest. A student raised their hand. But your species still fights wars. Still has violence. Yes, David acknowledged honestly. We're not perfect. Violence still exists on Earth. But so does peace, cooperation, compassion. We're working constantly to be better than our worst instincts. That's what intelligence allows, choice. We can choose to protect instead of hunt, to nurture instead of harm, to build instead of destroy. Petal stood from her seat. May I speak? When Sanctus nodded, she continued. I was afraid of David and Pickles when they first arrived. My species evolved being eaten by creatures like cats. That fear is millions of years deep in our biology. But I learned that evolution is not destiny. Yes, Pickles could hunt my pollinator partners. But she doesn't because she has no reason to. She's fed, safe, and content. The predator is still a predator, but the context has changed everything. Tillum stood next. I had panic attacks about predators. Real physical terror. But David helped me through human breathing exercises when I was struggling. Techniques he uses for his own anxiety. A predator species teaching a prey species how to manage fear. That is what humans offer. Not perfection, but understanding. Garrett added. My research shows that human psychological development is shaped by their history of cross-species bonding. They developed empathy not just for their own kind, but for others entirely. They recognize emotions in species that look nothing like them. That capacity for empathy across evolutionary lines is remarkable. Even Chef Barris spoke. Before the cat, we had Skrit destroying food supplies. I spent hours weekly dealing with contamination. Now, problem solved. The human offered a solution using predator capabilities in a way that helped everyone. That is practical cooperation. Sanctus listened to each testimony, his expression unreadable. Finally, he turned back to David. You have made an interesting argument, Mr. Warren. You suggest that humans are predators who learned cooperation. But can this be sustained? Or is it temporary good behavior while you seek acceptance? David considered carefully before answering. I can't promise humans will never make mistakes. We will, all species do. But I can promise that we will keep trying to be better. We domesticated wolves into dogs, wild cats into house companions, and ourselves from warring tribes into peaceful communities. That didn't happen overnight. It took thousands of years of choosing cooperation over conflict again and again. That pattern is deep in human culture now. We're not perfect, but we're committed to trying. He opened Pickles' carrier. The cat stretched, yawned, showing all her teeth, then climbed onto David's shoulder and settled there, purring. Several students still flinched at the display of predator dentition, but many more simply watched with curiosity or even affection. This cat could hunt, David said softly. She has every physical capability, but she chooses not to because she has everything she needs. Humans are the same. We could use our capabilities for harm, but we choose to use them for cooperation, exploration, creation, and protection, not because we're forced to, but because we've learned that coexistence is better than conquest. The observers departed that evening without announcing their conclusions. David returned to his normal routine. Classes, study sessions, pest control rounds with Pickles, presentations about human-animal relationships. Life continued with its new patterns. 4 weeks later, the announcement came through official Galactic Council channels. Earth had been granted provisional membership with a 5-year evaluation period. The report specifically cited successful integration examples such as the Tessara Minor Academy case, demonstrating human capacity for interspecies cooperation and adaptation. Dr. Bracht called David to his office to share the news personally. "Congratulations, Mr. Warren. Your species is now officially part of the Galactic Council. Your presence here contributed to that decision." David felt overwhelming relief mixed with responsibility. "What happens now?" Dr. Bracht smiled, a rare expression. "Now you finish your education. More human students will be accepted to the academy next semester. They will need someone to help them navigate mixed species environments. Someone who understands both the challenges and the opportunities. And Pickles, your cat has been formally recognized as a contributing member of the academy's ecological management program. She has also become required study material for 3 different courses." Dr. Bracht shook his head in amazement. "I never imagined I would be including a predator in our teaching curriculum." That evening, David sat in his dormitory room with Pickles curled in his lap, thinking about how much had changed in 1 year. He had arrived as an outsider with his support animal, facing fear and prejudice. He was leaving as someone who had helped bridge a gap between species, showing that predators and prey could share space when both chose understanding over instinct. His communication device chimed with incoming messages. Garrett wanted to celebrate with a study group gathering. Petal invited him to see her new garden section dedicated to earth plants. Tillam asked if he would present at next month's psychology symposium. Even Oris had sent a brief note acknowledging that coexistence, while uncomfortable, had proven possible. David smiled and started typing responses. Pickles, disturbed by his movement, stretched and relocated to her favorite sleeping spot on his bed. Within seconds, she was snoring softly, completely unconcerned with galactic politics or species integration. Looking at his cat, this small predator who had somehow changed the perspective of an entire institution, David reflected on the journey. Fear had not disappeared entirely. Some students still avoided him. Some faculty still questioned whether predators belonged in educational spaces. But bridges had been built. Understanding had grown. And most importantly, people had chosen to try. Change was slow. Progress was imperfect. But it was real. David finished his messages and looked out his window at the campus below. Students from dozens of species moved through the courtyards together, heading to evening classes and social gatherings. Somewhere down there, new friendships were forming. New bridges were being built. New understanding was growing. And it had started with one human, one cat, and the choice to show that coexistence was always possible when both sides were willing to try. Pickles meowed softly in her sleep, chasing dream prey through dream gardens. David laughed quietly and returned to his studies. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove that predators could be partners rather than threats. But tonight, he was simply grateful for acceptance, friendship, and one very lazy cat who had helped change the galaxy's perspective on what humanity could be.